Give me money, give me money, give me money, give me money, give me money.
Well, shit. I guess I brought this on myself, didn't I? I said I'd do a final top 10 episodes of MLP when the series concluded, and now I'm stuck with it. You all know my feelings on most of these episodes, so I shouldn't need to go too in-depth. So let's get through this super fast. This is the top 10 best, worst, and blandest episodes of Friendship is Magic.
Whatever happens, it is going to be perfect.
Yeah, I'm gonna be that bitch today. Spike at Your Service is hated by bronies because it features a kid being clumsy and dumb when overwhelmed by enthusiasm, but that's exactly why I like it. Spike's enthusiasm in this episode is absolutely adorable. I love this boy so much. He's valid. He's terrible, but he's valid. A lot of bronies are just pissy about a kid being a kid. Bronies in general have a lot of bad takes throughout the years, but rather than judge an episode on its merits, they look for extremely surface-level traits to declare an episode as good or bad. Like how they fixate on characters being in character, but rather than that being about characters being in character in a proper sense, it's more about a character not fitting the shallow, one-dimensional version of the character that the fandom has created in their mind that's easier for them to project onto. That's the issue here. It's not that Spike is actually annoying or out of character, it's that he's not the one-dimensional version of himself that bronies created in their head.
I wasn't sure on your position, had to make a judgment call.
Oh boy, do I love traveling to the future to see all the brony headcanons that were made to be real. I think it's safe to say that Friendship is Magic ended with the ending of the end, as that's when everyone's stories reach their conclusion. The last problem is just one big fan-servicey lap around the course to canonize 2.5 ships and vaguely gesture in the direction of another, because despite doing fan service, the writers are still too big of cowards to recognize that despite the overflow of white supremacists and neo-Nazis in the brony fandom, there were a ton more gay ships than there were straight ships. They took the safest, most non-threatening victory lap they could for a victory they had no business claiming. I long assumed this show would go out with a decaying gasp for breath, and I was right.
Why'd Kiki and Viola put you in the pony show?
Did you remember that Pinky is codependent and so emotionally delicate that being told to stop something that's making her friends miserable makes her have a complete and total breakdown into depression until her friends give in and just let her continue making them miserable so they don't have to deal with her perpetual guilt trip? No? Well, here's Yakety Sax to remind you, a completely rancid story from start to finish and a dark omen of things to come. None of us are safe. There is no hope.
You really are getting into this.
Pinky being slapped upside the head and told to stop being an emotionally needy asshole is one thing the show really needed more of, as the series has a big problem of Pinky moping until her friends come and coddle her insecurities. But Pinky getting all of that and learning to not judge someone so harshly when all they're doing is correcting you on minor things makes the episode a lot more valuable than that. I don't think it's said enough, but while habits like Mudbriar's might be a little annoying or off-putting, he's not actually doing anything wrong. So maybe look inside yourself and why you're so afraid of being wrong that you get so angry when you're corrected.
After that, I could use a massage.
Twilight turning into an alicorn is cool. Rapid fire musical numbers is Please Kill Me Now and End My Torment. Oh, I'm sorry. You wanted a proper critique? Well, I wanted a proper episode. Looks like we both get to suffer.
Were the other planes dumping cargo? Jesus!
I hope you like continuity, because otherwise this two-part finale is gonna bore you to tears. Oh, what's that? You're a kid? Yeah, you're fucked. Shadowplay is one of the biggest nattiers the show could ever get into. A big continuity-laden mess that built up a ton of needless mystery, only to then end in the way that the last several finales had ended, with the antagonist deciding, okay, I am a good guy now, and everyone else just taking that at face value. Because you know what they say, if Starlight was a base-breaking character the first time, surely the 5th time ought to work.
Always feels good to kick ass.
I know what you're thinking. Lily Orchard putting a Starlight episode on the best list, thine swine doth fly. Well, I must remind you that I praised this before. I shouldn't even need to explain the more nuanced reasons it's good. This episode finally shows Starlight doing something she should have done for every moment she was on screen in the series. Suffer. Starlight runs herself ragged to keep her rage bottled up from Trixie's bullshit and makes herself miserable in the process. And then after the schadenfreude is over, we get a lesson about properly expressing your anger, which children need and bronies desperately need. Anger is a healthy emotion, kids. And just like All Bottled Up, Sound of Silence talks about the importance of healthy anger and how anger isn't an emotion to be feared. 2 episodes that tap Silverquill on the head and goes, "You listening, you little coward." These days, people are browbeaten into believing that anger is a horrible, evil, vile emotion that renders everything you say invalid because it might make some some guy uncomfortable to be yelled at when he's doing something shitty to you. So anything that reinforces the idea that your rage is justified and not to be feared will only be a positive thing for kids.
Damn it, why won't you die?
Nothing like the worst antagonists to round out the blandest list. Compared to a lot of Starlight's later bullshit, the cutie map is arguably quaint, a cartoonish dictator fantasy that some charity cases in the audience took to mean communism because they said equality a whole lot, and through that brain fart then proceeded to claim the episode was a lot more deep and nuanced than it actually was. In reality, this is one of the most blatantly black and white situations ever. A cartoonish, one-dimensional villain that would make King Sombra look like Zuko by comparison.
This crew sucks.
Oh boy, somebody got salty. I think after Teen Titans Go did it, every creator's been trying really hard to get that snipe at the critics in, but what made Teen Titans Go unique was that the criticism it was sniping against was the nonsensical bullshit lie that the original was this super serious dramedy. It's just that once in a while, things would get kinda heavy, and so people assumed that was always the case. MLP had more conventional criticisms, like too many plot lines being repeated, too many ideas being overused, some ideas being boring, and only occasionally would the criticism actually be delusional, like Rarity being unlikable because, oh, the nerve, which is just classic tone policing. All Fame and Misfortune did was showcase the pride of the writers, who were very clearly incensed that a small portion of the audience they had erroneously pandered to weren't happy with every single thing they've ever made. They even sniped at criticisms they had actually acted on and corrected already. What salty bastard ordered this episode?
I'll remember this one.
It's a damn shame that this episode got overshadowed by the heteronormative pair, because Fluttershy being excited at the prospect of weird chaotic tea parties is the most delightful concept that perfectly suits My Little Pony, and the lesson about not trying to adhere to some idea of normal is absolutely wonderful. The thing is, kids, your friends are your friends for a reason. You don't have to impress them, they already like you, and if they don't, well, I guess they're not your friends, are they? Also, you can summarize the third act of this episode as Fluttershy wants her kinky boyfriend back, and that makes me happy.
That wasn't much of a fight.
Twilight learns the art of bureaucracy, and the song goes on too long. I remember a time when this was considered the greatest thing since Tummy Rubs entirely on the basis that there's a really long song in the episode. Musical numbers are old hat now, and there have been both better and worse examples, but Winter Wrap-Up is one of those songs that repetitively cycles through the chorus for about 80% of its runtime. It's not even a good song, it just burrows into your brain. The episode itself is mostly about Twilight failing to help because she's been arbitrarily banned from using her magic and decides to just get this pack of yokels organized. Nothing is lost from just skipping this. Just saying.
I couldn't fight worth shit. At least give me a challenge.
Well, to be perfectly honest, in my humble opinion, of course without offending anyone who thinks differently from my point of view, but also by looking into this matter in a different perspective and without being condemning of one's view and by trying to make it objective and by considering each and everyone's valid opinion, I honestly believe that I completely forgot what I was going to say.
I'm always on when it counts.
I'm pairing these two because they're basically the same episode and they're both very good. Mysterious Mare Duel is a very good episode about the importance of understanding how your friends work and teaching them to check themselves in the most effective way possible. That was inexplicably pilloried by bronies due to an incorrect perception of the character in question being out of character and the other characters not being as soft and gentle as they would have preferred. Heaven forbid we bruise Dash's ego after all. Likewise with 28 Pranks Later, a really good episode about Dash getting a taste of her own medicine that was unnecessarily pilloried by bronies because, well, Dash isn't like my headcanon. But the episode is good, teaches a good lesson about how cruelty begets cruelty and that one shouldn't be a dick, and bronies who didn't like either of these episodes can choke.
Someone had better buy me a drink.
I keep pronouncing the name of this episode is Feely Vanilli because when you've been doing this job as long as I have, you need to make things interesting for yourself somehow, especially when you have to watch Feely fucking Vanilli at some point. Thankfully, the last Fluttershy is Shy episode to have ever been made before Fluttershy started having all the best episodes in the series, and yet it went down with a squealing last gasp as Fluttershy's anxiety went from repetitive to goddamn get this poor woman some fucking medicine already. The only good thing to come out of Feely Vanilli is that the writers finally decided to do something else with this poor girl.
I've already played in Traffic, remember?
You know, it's crazy that Friendship is Magic spent years letting adults get away with massive war crimes just because they have a sad backstory and cried about it, but then put a child in hell and then encased her in rock entirely on the basis that she didn't feel remorse. I get the feeling something is wrong with Equestria's judicial system if a half-baked melodramatic ContraPoints apology is the best way to avoid being taken to court. You'd think eventually you just flood the stroking Twilight's ego-based economy and cause a recession, and I guess it technically did. The writers even admitted they just wanted this to be a surprise, subverting expectations purely for the sake of subverting expectations, a trend that has infected a lot of the entertainment industry these days, and it even commits the cardinal sin of villain writing by trying to write a manipulator but being so backed into a corner by your own shitty ideas you just flat out make everyone else dumb as hammers. Oh, but she wasn't redeemed, Lily. What, am I supposed to congratulate the show for doing the bare minimum?
Bitch. I'm gonna go drop the CND right now.
Still think I'm just a pretty face?
There's a lot of important lessons that children's shows seem to tacitly avoid trying to teach because they're made by socially maladjusted charity cases, and self-care tops that list. A Health of Information is one of those episodes that I would put into a collection of MLP episodes that are actually worth watching in order to cut down on the bloat. Not only does it teach a proper lesson about self-care and its personal and pragmatic value, but it also showcases how lore can be used to complement a story rather than overstay its welcome, as Fluttershy attempts to piece together a mystery to save her friend from certain doom. It's such an earnest and endearing episode, and I just can't help but be taken in by it. Even Twilight's weird flippancy, while clearly heavy-handed to push the self-care themes, doesn't bother me as much as it normally would because it all pays off in the end. Good and valid food. More, please. Oh wait, the show's over. More of this for Gen 5, please.
Here's a tip. This ain't love!
Hey, guess what? We made a romance story. Cool. Is it actually romantic? Ah, fuck, I knew I forgot something. The perfect pair is peak heterosexual nonsense. Hey, I know we don't have anything in common and I have a much more realistic relationship with someone else than I do with you, but we did glance at each other's directions when we were children, so I guess we may as well get married. Some people actually think this is the best episode of the series. Can you imagine the kind of person you'd have to be for that?
Just lay still and maybe we'll both live.
In direct contrast to Griffin the Brush Off, On the Road to Friendship presents the idea that if your friend sells your home even though it doesn't belong to her and for some reason doesn't see any issue with that, then, you know, just like, get over it. Over the last few years, there have been a worrying trend in children's cartoons where abuse and toxicity are romanticized and treated like something that can make a friendship or relationship stronger. And I just want to know, who hurt these people?
Good girls kick ass.
You know, I probably should have led with Griffin the Brush Off, but this kind of episode wouldn't be made today where a toxic bully is cut out of a friendship simply because they're a toxic bully. An episode that Hasbro seems ashamed to have made considering that the entire latter half of the series was one big attempt to unteach this lesson. And honestly, I think it's a generational thing. People my age seem to have a really hard time cutting out toxic relationships. They get so comfortable even when a relationship is going horribly that they're very resistant to the idea that a friendship needs to end, as if that means they failed in some way, like they have to stick around to prove to someone that they're not a failure. Kids, adults, teenagers, everyone watching this, you're not a failure for ending a toxic relationship. It's not failing to expect better for yourself and want to be happy. I feel like you needed someone to tell you that.
Couldn't last any longer than that.
Chrysalis is the Darth Maul of Star Wars, constantly brought back long after serving her usefulness as a character because she was a fan favorite and then twisted and mutated into this dancing monkey to be trotted out to make bronies cream themselves. The Mean Six and everything else Chrysalis has appeared in has served as a lesson in that not every character needs to return. I know you want it, but do you need it? It's like when people say Adagio should get a redemption. If she did, she wouldn't be Adagio anymore. So, like, don't.
Here comes the brat again.
Whether you look at the Wonderbolts as a sports team or a military organization, the idea that falling in line and accepting being hazed as a tradition is a nonsensical delusion pushed only by conservative simpletons with no empathy for other human beings. In sports, hazing is not actually permitted even if that ban isn't enforced, and in the military, hazing isn't a tradition, it's a fucking epidemic. The notion that it brings people closer together has been refuted countless times by many organizations. Hazing is like spanking your kids. Psychologists, professionals, and people with a basic understanding of cause and effect all say it's bad, and conservatives who don't want to accept that they were abused and are abusing others go, ugh, it's not that bad, why are you all so sensitive? Friendship is Magic had the chance to send a message to children about not tolerating bullying and instead tried to convince them to just grin and bear it because they might be making themselves a target, and I hope whoever wrote it fucking chokes.
Kinsey, I love you. A
few years ago, I would have said A Flurry of Emotions was just 20 minutes of Flurry Heart babbling at the camera, but that's not really what it is. It's actually a really soft and sentimental episode about Twilight learning that it isn't fair to expect Flurry to wait patiently while she goes through an entire day's worth of errands, that she has limits to her patience and it's unreasonable to expect her to behave and sit quietly for an indefinite amount of time. A lesson that a lot of parents really need drilled into their heads if we're being completely honest.
That has to be embarrassing.
Hey, you know the CMC are getting their cutie marks soon. We could dedicate 3 episodes to each one of them learning something about themselves that causes the epiphany that gets them the important thing they've wanted for so long. Yeah, we could do that. Or, and hear me out, we could sing a bunch of crappy songs and give them all the same one that will let us continue recycling their previous stories and clock out early. You know, Dave, this is why nobody likes you.
Steelport's had enough of this shit! Time for Stag to burn!
Trying to gaslight a young audience into believing that you need to stick by a family who routinely mistreats and humiliates you is my biggest pet peeve in terms of storytelling, and more shows are going this route, which I find to be very disturbing. This kind of blood is thicker than water narrative found in shows like Friendship is Magic and Steven Universe really needs to go away, because it instills some very damaging things in the minds of children. If your family does not act like a real family, you should not be obligated to treat them as such. You can pick your family. People do it every day, and fuck anyone who suggests that you have an obligation to people who treat you poorly. Why should you have to make amends when they clearly don't?
No, that's cool. I was beginning to think you turned all cold bitch on us, honey.
Amending Fences remains one of the more successful attempts at an atonement story, namely because the one doing the atoning is the main character and not some villain of the week immediately after plotting a mass genocide. Amending Fences reminds you of how much better these stories work when the stakes are lower and that there aren't people's lives on the line. Twilight isn't reaching out to Moondancer because the fate of Equestria hangs in the balance. She reaches out because she genuinely feels awful for what she's done and doesn't need motivation beyond that. It's almost like this was a show about interpersonal relationships before new writers tried to turn it into a fucking anime to please the greasy weebs in the back row.
Honey, you need help.
I find it hilarious that this episode remains the lowest rated episode of Friendship is Magic to this day. Hey, let's do that Celestia and Luna episode people have been begging for. Psych, it's really about Starlight. Oh boy, a premise we already didn't need, and now we extra don't need it. And then its thin veneer of a story still manages to grind to a halt in order to exploit the Dream Realm to spend the last act on dumbass fan service.
See, nothing to worry about. I got... what's that?
I've already torn into Do Princess a Dream of Magic Sheep and a whole glass of water and several other videos, so I won't bore you by repeating myself here. Suffice to say that the episode goes way too far in trying to portray a guilt complex that it slams face first into depression and self-harm. Both this and Rockoff in a Hard Place is a prime example of why children's cartoons need to stay in their fucking lane. Because if you're not prepared to tackle a heavy subject, don't touch the heavy subject. Self-harm and suicide, oh, I'm sorry, I mean being turned to stone, which is definitely not analogous to suicide, even though it's treated with the gravity and seriousness of suicide and contains all the tropes of a suicide story, is not something that needs to be discussed on a show for 6-year-olds about how to interact with other people without getting a shoe in your face. The most likely causes of suicide in any child within My Little Pony's target age demographic is going to be cyberbullying, bigotry, child abuse, or any combination of the three. In fact, the most likely cause is the latter two at the same time. And My Little Pony doesn't seem to be addressing that, and that's the problem. It talks about suicide and self-harm, but the most common causes of suicide and self-harm are left vague and esoteric, and you cannot do that because suicide and self-harm are fucking symptoms, and you can't talk about a symptom without talking about the disease. But the show chickens out of that. If you're not willing to tackle the heavy subject, don't touch the heavy subject. Stay in your fucking lane, asshole.
I'm still the best. Was it too much for you?
Nothing knocks it from the top spot, ever. I've gushed about this episode a lot because it really is just that good. I find a lesson in firmness and how often being nice can hurt just as much as it can help is so nuanced and so necessary. There are grown-ass adults who think that you need to be soft and coaxing to get someone to listen to you. Hell, the entire dirtbag left is built on this idea, at least where neo-Nazis are concerned. But that's not true. Sometimes you run into people who just won't fucking listen, and they need a different approach. Sometimes you have to be nice. Sometimes you have to roar at a bitch. And this was a lesson that Friendship is Magic kept applying with Fluttershy all the time.
There's no way that we can get in the zone because the zone sounds like a horrible place since we are terrible at buckball and we are going to lose and let everybody down and we don't want to play anymore!
Figure if we use some rope and elbow grease, we can make it up half.
Applejack! Can you please listen to me?
I was always critical of the fact that Fluttershy was learning the same lesson over and over and over again in the first couple of seasons, and I've also been vocal in my belief that the show's best episodes came from Fluttershy after the writers stopped doing that. When they started having Fluttershy retain information, build on ideas presented beforehand, always advance in the lesson, and apply assertiveness in different scenarios. It Ain't Easy Being Breezy's was the first instance of that, and it's so valuable and important. People talk a lot about how cartoons can be so much more than mindless entertainment, and they often mean being more like Avatar when they say that. But to me, this is what being so much more looks like. Friendship is Magic had a lot of problems, but when it was good, it was really good.
This wasn't one of your best ideas, hon.
I can't imagine whatever went through Hasbro's head to decide that a love letter to the fandom was ever necessary. Love letters to a fandom are never necessary or advised. Slice of life only became laughable as the years went on and the Brony fandom slowly eroded into a pit of pedophiles and white supremacists swallowing their own self-satisfied jizz. In 2020, if someone said, let's make an episode full of things bronies like, the only logical answer to that would be, how did you get in my office, Rebecca?
I'm gonna find you and put a bullet in that inflated fucking head of yours.
You know, I talk about intent versus execution a lot. I feel this episode is where it's most applicable, because Drag and Dropped could have been a really good episode concept had the writer not made every single decision they made in the process. In theory, this is an episode about Rarity having to accept that her boy slave has other things to do in his life except wait on her hand and foot. In practice, this is an episode about Rarity stalking and obsessing over a minor. And that's not me reaching. A lot of the shots, framing, and the way Rarity is animated in the presentation of the entire fucking episode carries so much of that undercurrent that I half expected Mike Henry to have a guest cameo.
Spike! Oh, Spike! I am so sorry. I am sorry, Spike. I know, but now I have to share him.
This is what I mean when I talk about writers checking their shit, because there's one clip where Rarity is making this face while offering Spike tickets to a convention, and this episode aired only a short while after it turned out that pedophiles were working at BronyCon, and that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Would it have been that much effort to drop this into Final Cut, slice that part out, and re-render it before the episode aired? Probably not. You know what else wouldn't have taken much effort? Going back over the storyboards and thinking, hey, maybe we should consider toning down Rarity's creepy obsession and dramatics. It isn't just that it looks bad out of context, it's worse in context because Rarity is trying to cut Spike off from other friends so that she can have him all to herself. And much of her behavior reeks of, hey kid, I've got candy, hop in my van. This is extremely similar to the way kids get groomed. It's similar to a lot of the ways the Brony fandom has groomed kids. It's similar to the way I was groomed. Too similar. Suspiciously similar. Hey, remember this clip?
We just went over that he is a child.
So?
What are the She is a grown-up.
And?
And he's a little kid. Yeah.
Yeah, she's a grown-up, he's a little boy, it's not appropriate.
Where did they go? Because I miss them. Friendship is Magic got really lazy as the seasons went on and pushed a lot of toxic shit, but that right there is the fucking nadir of some asshole who simply could not be bothered to check his own fucking work for 2 fucking minutes, of a production team who didn't once stop and think, hang on, what the fuck are we doing? I give Steven Universe a lot of crap for this, but at least Stevani and Steg were creepy in a, oh, the metaphors don't mix well together and the framing is really fucking weird and nobody gave a shit because anime reference kind of way. But this is just blatant and in your face. I thought we'd reach the worst for that when they made a reference to fucking body pillows, but apparently I was wrong. Little life lesson for Josh Haber. When you are the writer of a show for small children that interacts with the Brony fandom as much as it does, you cannot be this fucking tone deaf. I know you fucking know better, you bastard. And with that, we're done. We're done. It's finally over. The long-standing professional obligation is over, and I can move on with my fucking life. Okay, real talk. My career really kicked off when I started covering this show. It's how I built most of my audience and secured gainful employment for myself. But almost from the moment I started, I was always keeping in mind how I was going to phase it out when the show inevitably ended. I wanted to be able to move on easily, and so I built my content less around the MLP fandom and more around building my own. It's one of the reasons that among so-called MLP analysis channels, I was always the least in tune with the community. I had friends in the community very briefly, but I didn't do a lot of collaborations or group projects as was standard at the time, and I built my material around writing critique and critical thinking rather than fandom content. This was why I was always among the more vilified in the group, because I wasn't actively placating the biggest channels with the biggest egos. In fact, I often tore apart their work when I was talking about bad criticism. I never really vibed with the rest of the community because I was building my own, and it paid off because starting off later than everyone else, I quickly surpassed most of the other channels in terms of audience size and revenue, with only KP really ahead of me in any meaningful capacity. And I point this out because I always went out of my way to disregard the algorithm. I avoided the things that would get me fast subscribers. I refused to partake in behaviors that were considered the standard, like begging people to subscribe or having to constantly remind people about the implied subjectivity of human speech. I tried very hard to treat my audience like adults, which is why I can often be so harsh on all of you. And it's not often, but I do occasionally get reminded how much that effort is appreciated. I've had people say they appreciate that I don't patronize them in my videos, that I don't waste people's time with sponsorships and pleads to subscribe. And very recently I had a video up where I vented about the frustrations of dealing with my audience and the stress and burnout that's created. And I thoroughly expected that to tank my business. I expected people to unsubscribe and cancel their pledges en masse. I was wrong. What actually happened was I saw a massive uptick in pledges and a torrent of support and apologies from the audience, as well as actually changed behavior. Almost overnight, the thing that was making me hate my job dropped to about 10% of what it had been originally. I wouldn't have a roof over my head right now if it weren't for you guys. I wouldn't be able to live comfortably if it weren't for you guys. I was worried about what would happen to me for a long time, and now I don't have to worry about that anymore. I've seen a lot of people talk about how MLP changed their life or some shit, but I'm not going to do that because it hasn't. It didn't change my life because I never built my career around it in the first place. I built it around fostering an audience that was here for my content and not just the fandom. I built it around you guys watching this right now. Some cartoon didn't change my life. You guys did. I know I can be hard on you all, but from the bottom of my heart, thank you.